I still remember the exact moment everything changed. 1 second, my life was moving forward like any other day, and the next I was staring at a message that shattered everything I thought I knew. It was a normal morning, my coffee still warm in my hands as I scrolled through my phone. A notification popped up, an email from a bank I didn't recognize. Your payment is overdue. Please remit $4,218 immediately to avoid penalties. My stomach twisted. I didn't have any overdue payments. Hell, I didn't even have a loan. At first, I thought it was some kind of scam, a phishing attempt. But then I saw the details. My full name, my address, my social security number. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't just some random email. It was real. My hands were shaking as I called the bank. A polite but firm woman answered, "Yes, the loan is real. Yes, it was taken out under your name. No, there is no mistake." The money had been deposited months ago into an account I didn't recognize at first. Then it hit me. I did recognize it. It belonged to my brother. A cold wave of realization crashed over me. My own brother had stolen from me. For a few moments, I just sat there gripping my phone, trying to process what I had just learned. There had to be a mistake. Mark wouldn't do this. And then, like a slap to the face, the memory came rushing back. Just trust me, man. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Mark's voice was filled with unshakable enthusiasm, the same way it always was when he had a big idea. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. "Mark, the last opportunity you dragged me into cost me 10 grand. I still haven't recovered from that mess." "That was different," he argued. "That startup had issues, bad management. But this is solid. We're talking about an AI-driven financial assistant. It's going to change the way people invest. The market is shifting. If we get in early," I sighed. "How much?" His eyes lit up. "If we both put in $25,000 each, we'll be founding investors. That means when the company goes public—" "No," I cut him off, shaking my head. "Absolutely not. I can't do this again, Mark." His enthusiasm dimmed for a second, but then he leaned in. "Okay, okay. What if you don't invest directly? Just help me secure a loan temporarily. You know, just to get my foot in the door." I frowned. "What do you mean, secure a loan?" Mark shifted in his seat, playing it off as casual. "Just a simple document. General power of attorney. It would let me handle some financial transactions in your name, strictly for the investment. Nothing else. You know I'd never do anything to screw you over." I hesitated. Mark was reckless, but he wasn't a bad person. He had big dreams, and I had seen firsthand how hard he worked to make them happen. "This is the last time," I said firmly, grabbing a pen. "If this goes south, I'm done. No more investments, no more schemes. You want money? Go get a job like everyone else." Mark grinned, clapping me on the shoulder. "You won't regret this, bro. We're going to make millions." We made exactly zero. The startup collapsed within 6 months. The founders vanished. Mark was left scrambling, drowning in debt. I refused to bail him out. I told him I was done funding his dreams, that he needed to grow up and face reality. That was the last time we spoke about it. Or so I thought. I stared at the email on my phone, my stomach churning. The power of attorney. That's how he did it. That's how he took out a loan in my name without me knowing. He still had access, and he had used it. My phone rang. I didn't even check the caller ID. "I already knew," I answered. My voice was tight. "Did you know about this?" A sigh. Then my mother's voice. "David, listen." I cut her off. "He took out a loan in my name, Mom. That's fraud." "He was in a rough spot," she said quickly. "He thought he could pay it back before you noticed." I let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, great. That makes everything fine then." "David, keep your voice down," she hissed. "We don't need to make this a bigger deal than it is." I felt my jaw clench. "Mom, this is a big deal. I could press charges." She exhaled sharply. "You won't do that." I gritted my teeth. "Why not?" "Because if you do, you'll ruin his life. You'll ruin our family's reputation." And there it was, the real reason. It wasn't about right or wrong. It was about appearances. "It's just money," she continued. "You have a stable job. You can afford to pay it off. Mark can't." Something inside me snapped. Let me get this straight. Mark commits fraud, and instead of being mad at him, you're mad at me for not just sucking it up? You don't have to be dramatic. Dramatic, I repeated, my voice rising. Mom, this is illegal. There was a pause. Then her voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You're going to pay off that loan, and you're going to keep your mouth shut. That's what a good son would do. I hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone. My mind raced. My own mother had just told me to cover up fraud, because that's what a good son would do. I should have seen this coming. Mark had always been reckless, always chasing the next big idea, always swearing he was one step away from making it big. And every time he failed, someone else, usually me, was left cleaning up the mess. Not this time. I grabbed my jacket and keys. I was going to fix this, but not in the way they expected. I drove straight to my parents' house, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My thoughts raced, looping over the conversation I had just had with my mother. You're going to pay off that loan, and you're going to keep your mouth shut. That's what a good son would do. The words echoed in my head, fueling the fire inside me. Number not this time. As soon as I pulled into the driveway, I barely gave myself time to take a breath before marching up to the front door. Without knocking, I pushed it open and stepped inside. The tension in the air was thick. My mother stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. My father sat in his recliner, flipping through a newspaper like nothing was happening. And Mark? Mark was sitting on the couch, feet propped up on the coffee table, phone in one hand, beer in the other. He didn't even look up. Where's the money? I demanded, my voice sharp, cutting through the silence. Mark blinked, finally turning his attention toward me. Then, to my utter disbelief, he smirked. What money? He asked, as if I were the crazy one here. My hands curled into fists. The loan, the one you took out in my name. Where is it? Mark let out an exaggerated sigh and set his beer down. Relax, man. It's not like I blew it all at a casino. Then where is it? I pressed. He shrugged. It went into a business investment. You know how it works. I laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. Oh, I know how it works, Mark. Because every single time you invest, you lose everything. So tell me, where is my money? Mark leaned back against the couch, taking a slow sip of his drink. He looked completely unfazed. David, chill. I just need a little more time. The deal's still in progress. I stared at him, stunned. You lied. You stole from me. And you want me to be patient? He scoffed, rolling his eyes. It's not like you're struggling. Something inside me snapped. You think that because I worked hard, because I have a stable job, I'm just supposed to accept this? That it's my responsibility to fix your mistakes? David, lower your voice, my father finally spoke, barely looking up from his newspaper. We don't need to start a scene. A scene. I turned to him, incredulous. A scene? Dad, do you even hear yourselves? You're protecting a con artist just because he's your son. Mark just made a mistake, my mother said, her voice laced with forced calm. It's not worth destroying the family over. I let out a hollow laugh. Destroying the family? That's rich. Mark destroyed this family years ago, but you keep pretending he's just a misunderstood genius. Mark scoffed from the couch. You've always been so dramatic. That was it. I turned to him, my voice eerily calm. You fix this yourself. Mark blinked. What? You heard me. This is your debt, not mine. Not mom and dad's. Yours. You're going to pay it back, or you're going to deal with the consequences. My mother stiffened. David, please. I turned to her, my patience gone. Number, you had your chance to do the right thing, and you chose him. So now, I choose me. Mark sat forward, his smirk finally fading. Whoa, whoa, whoa. What are you saying? I stepped closer. I'm calling the bank first thing Monday and reporting this as fraud. You can explain yourself to them? Mark's face paled. David, come on, you don't want to do that. Actually, I really do. I turned, grabbed my keys, and walked out, slamming the door behind me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one cleaning up Mark's mess. This time, he was going to face the consequences. I barely made it through the night without smashing something. My mind kept replaying the conversation over and over. The way Mark smirked. The way my parents defended him like he was some helpless child. The audacity of it all. I had spent my entire life doing the right thing. I worked hard, stayed out of trouble, and never asked anyone for a single favor. But the one time I needed my family to have my back, they turned on me. By the next morning, my phone had exploded with missed calls. Mom, Dad, Mark. Even a few relatives who never usually called. I ignored all of them. By noon, my father called again. I don't know why, but this time I answered. David, he sighed heavily, we need to talk. Come to the house. Now. I closed my eyes, already knowing what this was. An ambush, a guilt trip, a last-ditch effort to manipulate me. But I wanted to look them all in the eye when I told them no. When I walked into the house, it was like stepping into an intervention. My mother was seated at the dining table, her arms crossed. My father sat beside her, his expression unreadable. Mark, of course, was lounging on the couch like nothing was happening. David, my mother said, her voice overly calm, sit down. I didn't move. I'm not here for a family meal. Say whatever it is you need to say. She pursed her lips. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. I let out a short, humorless laugh. I'm making this bigger? Mark stole from me. My father sighed. It's not that much. Let's not make a scene over a little money. I clenched my jaw. A little money? You're kidding, right? I looked at my mother, then back at my father. If it's such a little amount, why doesn't Mark pay it back? My mother sighed dramatically. We've talked to Mark. He'll pay you back. Mark scoffed from across the room. Eventually, I snapped my head toward him. See? He's not going to pay me back, and you know it. Silence. Finally, my father spoke again, his voice heavy. David, we'll pay off the loan. Just drop this whole thing. I stared at him, barely believing what I was hearing. You're willing to bail him out again? My mother leaned forward, her voice softening, like she thought she could still control me. Sweetheart, just let this go. Family forgives. I shook my head slowly. Number family doesn't do what he did. Come on, my father said, rubbing his temples. It's not like he robbed you. Yes, he did. Mark rolled his eyes and leaned back in his chair. God, you're so dramatic. I turned to him, stepping closer. You think this is a game, don't you? You think you can keep using people, and there'll be no consequences? Mark smirked. Relax, man, you can't do anything. I had legal authorization. The bank sees you as the borrower. So yeah, call the cops, sue me, whatever. It won't go anywhere. I leaned in slightly, just enough so he could see the fury in my eyes. Watch me. His smirk faltered for the first time. I turned back to my parents. And if you think I'm going to be the good son who just fixes everything, you're dead wrong. David, my mother warned. No, I snapped. Enough. I have let him get away with this for years. I let you two make excuses for him. I let you guilt me into fixing his messes. But this time, he crossed the line. My father sighed, rubbing his temples. So what? You're going to ruin your own brother's life? I held his gaze. He ruined it himself. Mark scoffed. You're bluffing. I smiled. You'll find out soon enough. Then I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. Because this time, I wasn't bluffing. I didn't waste any more time. The moment I got home, I pulled out every document I had. Emails, old bank statements, text messages from Mark. I found the original power of attorney papers he had convinced me to sign and started researching fraud cases. I made a list of every possible way I could hold him accountable. This wasn't going to be like before. This time, Mark was going to learn. By the next day, my phone had exploded with more missed calls. My mother, my father, even a few relatives. I ignored all of them. Then the inevitable happened. Mark showed up at my apartment. There was a loud, impatient knock at my door. I knew who it was before I even opened it. I swung the door open to find him standing there, breathing hard, eyes wild. He looked different, less cocky, more desperate. You think you've won, huh? He spat the moment I stepped outside. You think you're so much better than me. I crossed my arms. I don't think I'm better than you, Mark. I just know I'm not a criminal. He let out a bitter laugh. You're ruining my life over a little money. I narrowed my eyes. You stole from me, lied to me, and you don't even feel bad about it. I was going to pay you back, he yelled. You didn't have to escalate it this much. I shook my head. You weren't going to pay me back, Mark. You were going to keep stalling, keep making excuses, keep hoping someone else would fix it for you. Just like every other time. His hands balled into fists. Mom and Dad are furious with you. They said if you don't drop this, you're out of the family. I exhaled slowly, feeling a strange sense of relief. Then I guess I'm out of the family. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked genuinely thrown, like the idea had never even occurred to him. You're serious? He asked, his voice quieter now. Completely. His expression twisted in anger. You're such a selfish jerk. You know that? I tilted my head. You stole from me? And I'm the selfish one? Mark scowled. Then he took a step closer, voice low. You're going to regret this. I smiled coldly. No, Mark, you are. Then I shut the door in his face. A few days later, the real fallout began. The bank froze the loan pending a fraud investigation. Mark's accounts were locked, his credit was trashed, and the case was officially forwarded to the authorities. Then, my mother called again. 6 times. I finally picked up on the 7th. David, what did you do? She screeched before I could even say hello. I stayed calm. I filed a fraud report because Mark stole from me. He did not steal from you, she shrieked. You gave him permission. I sighed. I gave him permission to act in my best interest, not to take out a loan and blow it on another get-rich-quick scheme. He was going to pay you back. I laughed bitterly. With what money, Mom? Silence. Then she tried a different tactic. David, please think about what this will do to him. If the bank rules against him, they could involve the police. This could ruin his future. I felt nothing but exhaustion. Mom, I said slowly, he ruined his own future, not me. I'm done saving him. Then I hung up, and for the first time in my life, I felt free. By the next afternoon, the situation had spiraled completely out of control. I was sitting in my apartment when there was another knock at my door. This time, it wasn't Mark. It was my father. I considered ignoring it, but something told me this was a conversation I needed to have. I opened the door, and he stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. His expression was tense, his jaw tight. Son, he started, exhaling sharply. This is a mistake. I folded my arms. No, Dad. The mistake was letting Mark get away with this for years. He sighed. The bank called your brother. They froze the loan. They're investigating. I nodded. Good. His hands curled into fists. You need to drop this. If you don't, things are going to escalate. The bank could turn this into a full criminal case. Again, I said, good. He exhaled sharply, pinching the bridge of his nose. David, you're being stubborn. Mark isn't a bad person. That was it. I slammed my hand against the table, making him jump. Stop. Stop making excuses for him. He's a con artist, and I will make sure he faces consequences. My father gave me a hard look. You're really going to do this? Tear the family apart over money? I let out a bitter laugh. No, Dad. Mark tore this family apart the second he decided to screw me over, and not feel an ounce of guilt about it. My father rubbed his temples. Fine. We'll pay off the loan. Just drop this before it gets worse. I shook my head. If you pay it off, he gets away with it again. He'll just do it to someone else next time. Maybe to you. His mouth tightened, but he had no response. I stepped forward. This isn't about the money. This is about him learning that he can't do this anymore. Silence stretched between us. Then my father's expression hardened. If you go through with this, he said slowly, you won't just lose Mark. You'll lose us too. I held his gaze. So be it. For the first time in my life, I saw something crack in his eyes, like he had never actually considered the possibility that I might walk away from them entirely. He hesitated for a moment, then turned and left without another word. That night, I got a single text from Mark. You really think you won, huh? This isn't over. I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. No, it wasn't over. But soon it would be. because I was finally done playing his game. The next few days were chaos. My phone didn't stop ringing. Calls from my mother, my father, even a few relatives who had magically decided to care now that things were getting serious. I ignored most of them. Then the official letter arrived. The bank had completed its preliminary investigation. They had determined that Mark had misused the power of attorney for personal financial gain. The loan was frozen pending legal action, and they were forwarding the case to the authorities. I sat in silence for a long time, staring at the letter. It was happening. Mark was finally going to face real consequences. The next time I heard from him, it wasn't a text. It was a pounding on my front door. I opened it to find him standing there, breathing hard, eyes filled with desperation. "You think you've won," he spat the moment I stepped outside. "You think you're so much better than me?" I folded my arms. "I don't think I'm better than you, Mark. I just know I'm not a criminal." He let out a bitter laugh. "You're ruining my life over a little money." I narrowed my eyes. "You stole from me, lied to me, and you don't even feel bad about it." "I was going to pay you back," he yelled. "You didn't have to escalate it so much." I shook my head. "You weren't going to pay me back, Mark. You were going to keep stalling, keep making excuses, keep hoping someone else would fix it for you. Just like every other time." He clenched his fists. "Mom and Dad are furious with you. They said if you don't drop this, you're out of the family." I exhaled slowly, feeling a strange sense of relief. "Then I guess I'm out of the family." His mouth opened, then closed. He looked genuinely thrown, like the idea had never even occurred to him. "You're serious?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "Completely." His expression twisted in anger. "You're such a selfish jerk. You know that?" I tilted my head. "You stole from me, and I'm the selfish one?" Mark scowled. Then he took a step closer, voice low. "You're going to regret this." I smiled coldly. "No, Mark, you are." Then I shut the door in his face. A few days later, my mother called again. 6 times. I finally picked up on the 7th. "David," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Please. He's in trouble. They're talking about pressing charges. This could ruin his life." I closed my eyes, my voice calm. "No, Mom. He ruined his own life. Not me." For the first time, she had nothing left to say, just silence. And that was the last time I ever spoke to her. A week later, the real fallout began. The bank had officially classified the loan as fraudulent, and Mark was fully liable. His accounts were frozen, his credit was completely destroyed, and legal action was already in motion. If he didn't come up with the money soon, he was going to face serious criminal charges. And for the first time in his life, no one was coming to save him. My phone rang again that evening. It was my mother. Again. This time she didn't sound angry. She sounded defeated. "David," she whispered. "He's in trouble. He's desperate. Please, just help him one last time." I closed my eyes, feeling nothing but exhaustion. "No, Mom. Not anymore." She sniffled on the other end. "David, he's your brother. He made a mistake." I exhaled slowly. "No, Mom. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill. A mistake is making a bad investment. What Mark did was a choice. He chose to steal from me. He chose to lie. And now he's dealing with the consequences of his own actions." "You really won't help him." Her voice cracked. "I already did." Silence. Then finally she whispered, "So that's it. That's it." And then, for the last time, I hung up. A few days later, I got one final message from Mark. "I hope you're happy. You ruined my life." I stared at the text for a moment before deleting it. "No, Mark. You ruined your own life." And for the first time in years, I felt free. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. I expected to feel guilt at some point, maybe regret, maybe some small part of me would want to fix things. But I didn't. I felt lighter. Free from the burden I had been carrying for years. Mark's situation only got worse. He tried everything, begging for extensions, attempting to open new accounts under fake names, even trying to borrow money from other relatives. But nobody wanted to touch his mess. His credit was in ruins, and his reputation was just as bad. As for my parents, they stopped calling. I heard from an aunt that my mother still insisted I would come to my senses one day. My father just stopped talking about me altogether. And honestly, I was okay with that. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being dragged down by them. One evening, I sat in my apartment, staring at my phone. No more missed calls, no more frantic messages, just peace. I had spent so many years being the responsible one, the fixer, the scapegoat whenever Mark needed a way out. But not anymore. I wasn't Mark's safety net. I wasn't my parents' backup plan. I was finally living for myself, and I wasn't looking back. What would you do if a family member betrayed your trust like this? Would you forgive them or let them face the consequences? Let's talk in the comments below. Subscribe for more gripping stories and turn on notifications so you never miss an update.